Hello, my name is Nick Huntington Klein. What I'm going to be talking about today is another form of market failure. So remember, in a competitive market, if allowed to go to its own devices, we will generally get an efficient outcome. But there are cases in which that will not occur. And specifically, when we have a competitive market that does not provide an efficient outcome, we call that market failure. Last time we talked about externalities as being one source of market failure. Today we're going to be talking about the kind of good itself, and in particular the kind of market that kind of good leads to, some of which do not fit well into a market setting. And we need something else to sort of make it say the market works at all. And if we just try to do a regular competitive market, things are going to fall apart. We're going to have an inefficient result, which is going to lead us to which is going to mean market failure. So we're going to be talking about whether goods are rivalrous or not, and we're going to be talking about whether goods are excludable or not, and what happens with the mixes of those two things. So first of all, what are rivalrousness and excludability? Rivalrousness is a feature of a good that is basically, can it be used up? Can you and I both use the same unit of this good? So for example, a piece of pizza is rivalrous. If I eat a piece of pizza, you cannot also eat that same piece of pizza, right? So that is a rivalrous good. Let's talk about also a non-rivalrous good. How about national defense? If you are protected from invasion by the army, that doesn't mean there's less protection left over for me, right? If they're protecting the country's borders, it's not like I'm using up all of the protection and there's none left over for you. So something is non-rivalrous if one person can use it and someone else can use that same unit of that same good. Another example of this is like streetlights. You being able to see because of a streetlight doesn't mean there's less light left over for me. So that would be rivalrousness. It's rivalrous if it gets used up, and you using it means I can't use it too if we are rivals in consumption. It's non-rivalrous if we can both use it at the same time and the same unit. How about excludable? Something is excludable if I can force you to pay for it if you want to use it. So this is something that, a good can become excludable or non-excludable depending on sort of how it's set up. But the basic idea is there some way that if you don't pay for it, I can keep you from getting it? Can I exclude you from using this good just because you didn't pay for it? So let's take Disneyland as an example. So if you don't live near Disneyland, something you might not know is that every night they have a fireworks display. And if you live anywhere in Anaheim where Disneyland is, you can see this fireworks display even if you're not in the park. So that would be an example of a non-excludable good, right? Disneyland can't force you to pay for a ticket to watch the fireworks because they can't keep you from looking at the sky, right? They can't say, hey, you didn't buy a ticket, don't look at the sky tonight, right? You're not allowed to. You haven't bought the right to look at the sky. They can't do that. So the fireworks display at Disneyland is an example of a non-excludable good because they can't stop you from using it just because you didn't pay. Excludable goods are goods that they can stop you from using it if you didn't pay. So going back to Disneyland, the rides at Disneyland are excludable. You can't ride the rides at Disneyland until you buy a ticket. Okay? The fact that they can keep you out because you didn't buy a ticket and keep you from riding the rides means that the rides at Disneyland are excludable, even though the fireworks display is not. Right? Anything that they can force you to pay for, if you want to have it, is excludable. So anything you would buy in a store that you have to pay for at the checkout stand, that would be excludable. Anything that you can just have access to. The national defense is another example. So, right, so we talked about how national defense was non-rivalrous. It's also non-excludable, right? You can't, somebody who doesn't pay their taxes still gets protected from foreign invasion by the army, right? You can't say, oh, hey, hey, Canada, are you going to invade us? Well, all these people paid their taxes. You can't invade them, but you can invade the people who didn't pay their taxes, right? That doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. So that would be another example of a non-excludable good. So we have rivalrousness and we have excludability. What happens to kinds of goods that are or are not those things? So let's start first of all with things that are both rivalrous and excludable. We call these private goods. And these are just the kinds of goods that we've been talking about all term. So these are private goods. Anything you would buy in a store is generally a private good. And these are just, a regular market, if we allow the competitive market to work, there's no problem there, right? You sort of want things to be rivalrous and excludable in order for the private market or the competitive market to work properly and efficiently in providing that good. So that one's easy. Let's move on. How about something that is rivalrous but not excludable? So this is something that if I use it up, then there's none left over for you, but we can't stop people from using it. These are what are called commons goods, right? Because I can't stop you from using it, but when you do use it, there's less left over for me. So an example of this might be, fish stock in the ocean. If we took away the fishing permit system, then fish stock in the ocean would become a commons good. Why does the permit system matter? Well, because if there's a permit system, that means that it becomes excludable. I can force you to pay in order if you want to fish those fish. But if there's no permit system, then it becomes a commons good. What happens with commons goods? They get consumed immediately because, well, what's happening, right? You're going to get overconsumption, right? Too high of production, because everyone's going to think, well, it might make sense to save some of this stuff for later. But if I don't use it, someone else is going to, and there's not going to be any left over for me. So I better rush out and consume as much of it as soon as possible. Another good example of this is like if you leave a bowl full of candy on your doorstep at Halloween and you don't watch it, there's going to be some kid who comes along and just empties the entire bowl into their bag, right? That's an example of a commons good, because there's nothing that stops them from taking all the candy, as long as nobody's watching. And it's also rivalrous. Once I take the candy, you can't take the same candy. Okay, so that's commons goods. How about things that are excludable but not rivalrous? These are what we're going to call artificially scarce goods or club goods. And so these are things that I can stop you from using them, but why would I stop you from using them? It would be efficient to let you use them because you using them doesn't impose any costs on anybody else. So this is a lot of things fall into this category, especially recently, because most digital goods are artificially scarce. Take a song download, for example. Think back to when iTunes used to be the main way that people downloaded music. Okay, so you'd have to pay $1 to get a song. Okay, that's an art. So first of all, that is an example of a excludable good because you can't have the song if you don't pay the $1. But also, it is non-rivalrous because when I allow you to use that song, it doesn't take anything away from anybody else. You and I can both listen to the exact same file without there being anything left over, right? Once they've produced the song, once they have it recorded and in their system, it is absolutely costless, or nearly so, to let one more person listen to it, right? Producing the song was expensive, recording the song was expensive, but once we have the file itself is non-rivalrous. You and I can both listen to the same song without there being anything left over for anybody else. So in an artificially scarce good, these are going to be underproduced or underconsumed. Because what would the efficient quantity be? Well, these things are basically costless to let somebody else use them. It is costless to let another person listen to the same file of the same song. And so the efficient price would be zero, right? If we're going to be efficient, we want the marginal cost equal the marginal benefit. So if people should consume up to the point where the marginal benefit is zero because the marginal cost is zero. So the efficient price is zero. But I can stop you from using it because it's excludable. So I'm not going to set a price of zero. I'm going to set a price that's positive. And so you're not going to consume up to the point where your marginal benefit is zero. And so that is inefficient. That is under-consuming. However, on the other hand, if we did set a price of zero, nobody would bother to make the good in the first place. So the market would sort of fall apart. So we sort of have a catch-22 here where we're inefficiently producing. And yet, if we were efficiently pricing the good, nobody would bother to make the good in the first place. So this leads us to why these are usually called club goods. The idea with a club good is that each unit of the good that you want to get is free. But you have to pay a price in order to get in the club that will allow you to use this sort of library of stuff. A good example of this is Spotify. So Spotify is an example where you have to pay a monthly fee, but once you've paid that fee, you can listen to as many songs as you want, which is going to get us a lot closer to efficiency because what is the marginal cost of letting you listen to another song? Basically zero. What do you have to pay to listen to another song? Nothing. And so the marginal cost is allowed to equal the marginal benefit, and you will consume an efficient amount of the good. It's not perfectly efficient because you had to pay that fee at the start. So there are some people out there who are not going to be willing to pay the fee, and so they're not going to consume up to the point where their marginal benefit is zero. So it's inefficient for them, or rather their consumption is going to be inefficient and too low, but at least everybody who pays the club fee is going to consume efficiently. So that takes us finally to things that are neither rivalrous nor excludable. These are called public goods. So these are things that you don't use them up, but also I can't force you to pay for them. So this would be something like national defense. I can't force you to pay for national defense in order to be a beneficiary of national defense, but also you don't use it up for anybody else. So it's kind of good that we can't force you to pay because, if we could, then that would be artificially scarce. That would be an inefficient consumption. So the problem with public goods is that it's very hard to turn a profit on them. You can't make any money using public goods because you can't force anybody to pay for them. And so we get under consumption because no one's going to be willing to produce the good because they can't get paid for the good. This is typically why public goods end up being produced by the government. Because the government can force you to pay for the good, because they can force you to pay your taxes. And so things like national defense, street lights are often provided by the government. Fire departments are often provided by the government. Lots of things that are provided by the government are public goods because they are things that a private firm would not be willing to do because they couldn't make any money on it because they can't force people to pay for it. And everyone else is going to just want to free ride. They're going to say, hey, I don't want to pay for national defense. I will just choose, if we can make it optional to pay for it. A lot of people would say, I'm not going to bother paying for that. I'm going to hope that somebody else pays for it, and I'll just sort of ride on their coattails. That's called free riding, and that is one of the problems with attempting to provide a public good in a competitive market. And so the government usually steps in those cases. All right, so those are 4 kinds of goods defined on whether they are rivalrous or not and excludable or not, and also what happens if you try to provide those 4 kinds of goods in a competitive market. Only one of them really truly works efficiently. The other 3 are going to suffer some form of market failure. We're going to produce and consume the inefficient amount. All right, thank you.